ACT English practice. This video is for anyone who wants to get a little practice with ACT English passages. On the ACT English, there are 75 questions in 45 minutes, so you do have to move with the speed. But a lot of the questions are on specific like grammatical constructions, so a lot of them you can figure out right away. Let's do 5 questions for this video. So the passage is a microscope in the kitchen. I grew up with buckets, shovels, and nets waiting by the back door, semicolon. Hip waders hanging in the closet, semicolon. Tide table charts covering the refrigerator door, semicolon. And a microscope was sitting on the kitchen table, period. So we have a long first sentence, and underlined is waiting by the back door, and the punctuation mark, semicolon, is underlined as well. So you have to pay careful attention to detail. So looking at what's underlined and looking at the answers over here, this is a question about punctuation. And this is a tricky first question because the normal rule for lists is to separate items with commas, right? If you have a list of 3 things, you would separate those items with commas. But what's tricky about this is that there's a little used rule, it's not super common, that when the item, one of the items within the list has commas within it, then you separate the items, the overall items, with semicolons and not commas. So there's not just like a bunch of millions, tons of commas. So for this sentence, which is divided up into different items in a list, you actually want to separate them with semicolons instead of commas, because this first one, buckets, shovels, and nets, already has commas within it. So the best answer for this is no change, and I think this is a particularly hard question. The explanation is right here. The semicolon after the word door is appropriate because semicolons are used between items in a series when one or more of these items include commas. So that's a hard question. Let's go to number 2. It's in the same sentence. So we have nets waiting by the back door, hip waders hanging in the closet, tide table charts covering the refrigerator door, and a microscope was sitting on the kitchen table. This is a question about parallel construction, and there's typically a couple questions on this in the ACT English test. Parallel structure or parallel construction is when you have items in a list, like more than one item, you want to keep them in the same form. You want everything to be parallel. So nets waiting, hip waders hanging, tide table charts covering. You can almost hear it. Instead of a microscope was sitting, you would just say, and a microscope sitting on the kitchen table. So the correct answer for number 2 is G, parallel structure. Let's go to number 3. Having studied, comma, my mother is a marine biologist. Having studied sounds not right to me, sounds unclear to me. For number 3, I don't think you even need having studied, right? If your mother is a marine biologist, it's probably pretty clear that she has studied. So for number 3, instead of having studied, my mother is a marine biologist, it's probably ACT a lot of times just likes you to have things very clear. We would say my mother is a marine biologist, and that's the most concise wording for that sentence. Be on the lookout for those a lot on the ACT test. Number 4, our household might have been described as uncooperative. So there's nothing grammatically wrong in that sentence the way I read it. But it does seem a little out of place because the previous sentence said my mother's a marine biologist. The next one says our household might have been described as uncooperative. Let's keep reading. Our meals weren't always served in an expected order of breakfast, lunch, and supper. Everything was subservient to the disposal of the tides. When the tide was low, mom could be found, etc. So number 4 has the whole sentence underlined. So is it best our household might have been described as uncooperative? Sounds a little strange to transition. F, there seemed to be no explanation for why mom ran our household the way she did. That's not exactly true because it seems like everything's dependent on her job and the ocean, things like that. G, our household didn't run according to a typical schedule. Or H, mom ran her household in a most spectacular manner. I'm going with G here as it provides the best transition. to the rest of that paragraph. See their explanation. This is a good introductory sentence because the rest of the paragraph explains how the narrator's household didn't run according to a typical schedule. All right, let's go to just one more question, number 5. Our meals weren't always served in the expected order of breakfast, lunch, and supper. Everything was subservient to the disposal of the tides. So everything was dependent on these tides. Let's see what they got for this one. Nothing is grammatically wrong there, I don't think. Let's see, number 5. Everything, no change, was subservient. Everything was defenseless in the face of. Everything depended on. Everything trusted in the tides. I'm going to go depended on as the most clear, concise wording for that sentence. So hopefully this was helpful for you. Just 5 quick questions right here for the ACT practice.